Week 7 of college football delivered maybe the game of the year in Oregon versus Washington, but also a few statement wins by Notre Dame and Oregon State, and even a few upsets sprinkled in. And today we're going to be talking about almost all of it. So with the intro out of the way, I'd like to say hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today we're going to be recapping Week 7 of college football, starting with Michigan versus Indiana. And in this game, we saw Michigan pretty much dominate from the halfway point in the second quarter till the end of the game. They did start off a little slow, which was concerning at the time, but they turned it on, they figured it out, they made some adjustments. Indiana is a well-coached football team. I do think Tom Allen, especially defensively, is a solid head coach. He's probably not going to keep his job after this year, but it is what it is. I predicted Michigan to win 42-3. It ended up being 7-52. That's close enough. That's a W. I'll take that. This is pretty good. Michigan ended up dominating. J.J. McCarthy looked really good. The run game started to get going. Donovan Edwards got a touchdown finally. Hopefully that can be used to get him some confidence going so we can see him turn back into the running back that he was last year. Khalil Mullings was out, so we got to see the youngins, got to see Benjamin Hall make some plays. By the way, I didn't know Benjamin Hall was 5'11 and 235 pounds. He moves really, really well. That kid might be a special sort of athlete at the running back position if he really is 5'11 and 234 pounds. I don't particularly understand how that was a 3-star recruit, but Mike Hart might have done it again, finding another diamond in the rough, so to speak. The offensive line, I think, did take a bit of a step back from the past 2 weeks. They've looked absolutely dominant the past 2 weeks. This week, they just looked good. The running game was still solid, but they gave up some pressures and some sacks in the pass game. I think number 44 for Indiana, I cannot remember his name, but number 44 for Indiana did, I think, have 3 sacks or so. It was disappointing to see that, but I don't think it'll be a problem long term. I do think Michigan did kind of get caught napping a little bit heading into this game. I think that can explain a few of the early struggles. Maybe they were looking ahead to the rivalry week going to East Lansing. I don't know, but they got it done. They figured it out. They pulled it all together. There's not a whole lot to complain about. Anybody who is finding fault in this performance is nitpicking at an astonishing level, and that's pretty much all that I have to say. Michigan continues to roll. They continue to look like a legitimate national championship contender, and I like to see it. Oregon versus Washington, maybe the game of the year so far. Both quarterbacks played outstanding. Both running backs, I also think, played really, really well. I was expecting that out of Bucky Irving, not so much out of Washington. I didn't particularly think they would be able to run the ball like they did. I think that was probably the reason they won the game, is because the offensive line came to play. They were firing off their blocks and moving people. So the run game got going, and Michael Penix could deal in the pass game. He had a couple of absolutely incredible passes, including the one to win the game to Rome Odunze on the outside, but Oregon had a chance to win the game, or at least send it to overtime, couldn't make the field goal. I thought Bo Nix played really well. He did end up pushing the ball down the field, which is what I wanted to see out of him, because that, to me, is what is going to elevate his game to a NFL level, to like a first-round pick sort of level. I do think he's a good athlete, certainly capable of extending. He's certainly capable of moving the pocket very well, but as an NFL prospect, I'm a little bit lower on him than I think the consensus is. And I really liked this Washington team. I did think that they were maybe just slightly better than Oregon, even though I did pick Oregon to win 41-38. It was pretty close to the actual score, so I'm going to give myself like a half of a win, tiny little pat on the back. But I did think Oregon would win, even though I thought Washington was a better team, because I thought Oregon was going to be able to maybe run the ball more dominantly. Washington's defense, I think, punched above their weight class this past week. I don't think they're actually that good, and they could be in for a letdown this week, but that is a topic for another day. Either way, if Oregon had won this game or if Washington had won this game, the quarterback of the winning team was going to become the Heisman frontrunner, and we've seen that, especially with Caleb Williams doing what he did against Notre Dame. We'll talk about that in 2 segments from now. But Michael Penix is now the favorite to win the Heisman. If the Washington team can win the Pac-12 and make the playoff, I think it's his award. I think at this point, he is in the driver's seat for the Heisman Trophy, and it might take 2 losses in order for him to not win the award. But even then, if he does have a bad game and Washington ends up dropping to like a 1-loss team, if they run the table and end up 11-1, I think he wins the Heisman Trophy award if he can win the Pac-12 title game then. But if they end up 12-0 and they lose in a potential rematch against Oregon on a neutral field in the Pac-12 championship game, then I still think he would probably win the award. I think it would be his anyway, even though he had lost the championship game. Either way, it wasn't just the quarterbacks that impressed. Bucky Irving was really good. Troy Franklin was really good. I think Rome Odunze has planted himself in the wide receiver 2 conversation. I still have Keon Coleman just ahead of him, but Odunze is very, very good. I really like him. It's a shame McMillan got hurt after fighting to get back for this game, but Polk made a lot of money. I think he elevated himself into that day 2 conversation and maybe the top 10 wide receivers in this upcoming class for me, should he choose to come out. It was a hell of a game. Washington won. They deserved to win. They played out of their minds. And should there be a rematch in a potential Pac-12 championship game, Oregon might win, Washington might win again. Who knows? I know that the real winner, though, in that scenario would be fans of college football. Miami versus North Carolina. This game went pretty much exactly like I said it was going to go. I said Miami was going to come out and they were going to play out of their minds and it was going to look like a close game, but then North Carolina was going to prove that they are in fact a top 10 team in the country and a legitimate player in the ACC and a legitimate player for the playoffs. And North Carolina did just that. Tez Walker looks like a legitimate number 1 wide receiver. He might be the second best wide receiver in all of the ACC, behind Keon Coleman for Florida State, obviously. So even though I predicted the game to be Miami 35, North Carolina 38, I am going to take the W on this one because it played out exactly like I said it was going to play. I hit the narrative directly on the head. So I'm going to give myself the W in that scenario. And we'll get to my L's later, because the next 2 segments I took some L's. Not necessarily in who I thought would win the game, but how it ended up playing out. Anyway, back to North Carolina versus Miami. I think Miami is a solid football team. They're probably a top 25 team in the country. They ended up losing to Georgia Tech for absolutely no reason at all, and that's been beaten to the death 150 times. We don't need to go over it again. Mario Cristobal might have cost his team a chance at the ACC title game. Okay, I'm moving on. But that is a very good team and a program on the rise. They have a lot of talent, and Tyler Van Dyke, the quarterback, looks like a completely different player under this new offensive system rather than under Josh Gaddis' system, which if you've watched Maryland, then you also realize that Josh Gaddis just isn't good at calling offensive plays and running an offensive scheme. He's a very good wide receiver coach, but doesn't particularly matter when you're an offensive coordinator and can't call plays or game plan. Nevertheless, I do think Miami is trending in the right direction. North Carolina, on the other hand, I was on them way earlier than most people. I have been talking about North Carolina for weeks and them being a legitimate playoff contender. I've had them ranked consistently higher than in the AP poll, and I really, really like this team. They effectively have 3 straight bye weeks as they play Virginia, Georgia Tech, and Campbell before a decisive battle against Duke, and then they go on the road against Clemson and on the road against North Carolina State. If they can come out of their next 6 games, but really those final 3 games, with a 2-1 record or only 1 loss, I think we can safely say they're going to go to the ACC championship game, and if they beat Florida State, they damn well might go to the playoff. UCLA versus Oregon State, on the other hand, did not look like I expected it to look like. I thought this was going to be a defensive battle. It was not. Oregon State looks like a real football team. DJ Uiagalelei looks like he is in complete command of that offense. The run game is dominant. The defense is getting better, and I was maybe a little bit too high on UCLA. I did talk about Dante Moore and how I was kind of in the back of my mind thinking, oh, this might be a breakout game for him. It wasn't. He didn't play very good. He was up and down like he has been the entire season. He is just a true freshman, but he has not necessarily lived up to the hype quite yet. I still think he has to do a little bit more before I can say that he's lived up to that 5-star billing. I do have confidence that he will be able to do that, though. Anyway, Oregon State made a statement in this game. They won this game 36-24. I predicted this game to be UCLA 17, Oregon State 23. I thought this was going to be a close defensive battle. Oregon State had won this game by the time we got halfway through the third quarter. I mean, they gave up a touchdown at the beginning of the fourth quarter, but then they kind of turned it on. Ball control offense, give it back to UCLA. They can't do anything, and that's how the rest of the game pretty much played out. It was, in fact, a statement by Oregon State. I think they are way better than perhaps even I was giving them credit for early on in the season. They did lose to Washington State, who got decimated by a Arizona team that actually looks pretty good under head coach Jedd Fisch. Nevertheless, Oregon State is only one loss in conference. UCLA is now 1-2 in conference play. I think that UCLA, had they won this game, would have had maybe the clearest path to the Pac-12 championship of any of the so-called contenders, but they lost this game. So can't really talk about that. They still get to play USC, and they still, if I'm being honest with you, have the easiest schedule of like the top half of the Pac-12 left, because they don't draw Washington or Oregon this year. So they've still got a pretty decent chance to get to that 10-win mark, which would be big for Chip Kelly. Either way, I think this UCLA team is a team built for next year. Next year, now that they're joining the Big Ten, I think that actually might help them, the fact that they're joining the Big Ten. But in the Big Ten next year, I think UCLA might be sort of a shocking contender next year, because they're returning a lot of their talent, and most importantly, they're returning their 5-star quarterback. Oregon State, on the other hand, completely controls their own destiny. They have a bye week this week, then they play at Arizona, at Colorado versus Stanford. I think that should be 3 relatively easy W's. I don't think those teams have the talent to hang with Oregon State this year. And then they're home versus Washington and end the season on the road against Oregon State, with the opportunity to potentially keep Oregon out of the Pac-12 championship game and play themselves in it as well. Oregon State might just be the 3rd best team in the Pac-12 this year. And USC versus Notre Dame, I just got to man up on this one. I'll take my L. I'll take it. Notre Dame fans, you won the game. You didn't just win the game. You dominated the game. Offensively, I did kind of predict what you would do. I predicted you get 41. You bested that. You got to 48. USC, though, I thought would get to 38. They didn't. They only got to 20. I will say that was an incredible effort by Notre Dame's defense. Caleb Williams did not look good pretty much from the snap until the end of the game. He did not look like himself. And more importantly, USC looked like they did not want to be there. They had no fire in them. They had no fight in them. They were just like, I just want to go home, man. That's what they were like. They were playing like they wanted to go home, and they were just wanted to get through it. Like it was a Friday, and they had been forced to work the previous weekend, so they'd work like 12 days in a row, and they're just like, man, I just want this to end so I can get to my weekend and get home. And man, they got utterly destroyed. They didn't look like they belonged on the same field as Notre Dame. Like, I thought USC was fake. I was way lower on them than the AP poll. I had them ranked from like 10 to 12 throughout this entire process because I'd never once thought that they were a real contender in the Pac-12 or for a playoff spot, like pretty much everybody else did at the beginning of the year. So I'm going to take that as a W. But this specific game, I saw the Notre Dame that I wanted to see against Louisville. I saw the Notre Dame that I wanted to see against Ohio State, and we didn't see it against Ohio State. I still don't understand why you refused to give the ball to Austin Estime in the Ohio State game. That made no goddamn sense then. It makes even less sense now. But I'm getting sidetracked. Back onto this game. Notre Dame dominated. They were clearly the better team. They were the better coached team. They were the better prepared team. They were the team that wanted to win. They were the team that wanted to play. USC, I mean, I don't know what to say about USC other than they didn't want to be there. And that falls entirely on Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley might be a fake head coach. I mean, he had like one close game in the playoff, and that was versus Georgia, and I don't even know if he was the head coach. Wasn't that Bob Stoops last year? I mean, wow. Lincoln Riley might just not be him. Lincoln Riley isn't him. I think we can safely say that now. USC might be staring down the barrel of like 9-3 because I don't think they're beating Oregon, and I sure as shit don't think they're beating Washington. Unfortunately, this game doesn't count as a loss in conference, so they're still undefeated in the conference. But, man, USC is not a real football team, and I'm not sure that is going to change because I don't think Lincoln Riley has what it takes to look potentially his best friend in the face and say, you're fired because you can't fucking coach, dog. So, speaking about Alex Grinch, the DC, so I don't think that USC is ever really going to get better. I'm not sure that they can. Notre Dame, though, got their program building win against, I believe, what was a AP top 10 opponent. Notre Dame appears to be able to cruise to sort of 10-2 and potentially sneak into a New Year's Six bowl. And if they can win that, then Marcus Williams might be proving himself to be the guy at Notre Dame. With my W's and L's from my predictions on Friday out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the AP Top 25. The top 4 remain unchanged from last week, but at number 5, Washington jumps 2 spots. At number 6, Oklahoma falls 1 spot. Penn State also falls 1 spot. Texas moves up 1 as Oregon falls back 1, so they end up swapping places. North Carolina goes up 2 spots, finally getting into the top 10. I've had them there for weeks. Alabama remains stagnant at number 11 after a close victory against Arkansas. I do think Arkansas is maybe the best 2-5 team in the country. I think that's a quality football team. I just think they've ran through the gauntlet with the teams that they're playing. Oregon State moves up to 12. Ole Miss remains stagnant at 13. Utah up to 14. Notre Dame up 6 spots to 15. Duke up 1 spot. Tennessee up 3 spots rather. USC down 8. They should be lower. LSU up 3. Missouri up from unranked. Louisville falls down to 7 after losing to a 1-win Pittsburgh team. And that was shocking. I get the emotional letdown aspect of everything, but just the way that game played out, that was wow, that was rough for Louisville. Air Force finally gets some respect. They're ranked 22. Tulane back into the rankings along with Iowa, and we finish off the top 25 with UCLA falling 7 spots. All in all, there's less points of contention this week than other weeks. I do believe that UNC should be ranked ahead of Oregon and Texas, but we'll get to that in a minute. Outside of that, that's really my only major gripe with this. I have pretty much the same opinions throughout the board. USC should be a little bit lower, but, it's whatever. It's a big brand. They want them ranked so USC fans can pay attention and shit like that. It is what it is. I'm not too worried about it. I understand why the AP poll does it, why they have the bias towards major brands, that is. Anyway, let's go ahead and pivot into my top 25, starting with 25 to 21. At number 25, I have UCLA. At 24, I have Iowa. At 23, I have Tulane. At 22, I have USC falling 11 spots. And at 21, I have Notre Dame coming in from being unranked. I basically have Iowa and UCLA ranked because I don't have anybody else to rank, and I've committed to doing a top 25. But when it comes to Tulane, on the other hand, I think had Pratt been able to go against Ole Miss, there's a solid probability that Tulane is undefeated and ranked in the top 15, maybe even the top 10. So I do think Tulane is a solid team. I think they and Air Force have separated themselves from the rest of the group of 5 in terms of being that highest ranked champion to automatically get a New Year's Six bowl, maybe against USC again. Who wouldn't like to see Tulane and USC run it back? And speaking of USC, I have them falling 11 spots all the way down to 22, which is probably where they should have been ranked this entire time. USC, I knew, was the fakest team in the country. I knew that already. And Notre Dame, who at one point in the season, early on in the season, I thought was a legitimate, not only playoff, but national championship contender, just absolutely gave it to them, as we've already discussed in this video. And I have them jumping all the way from unranked to 21, just ahead of USC because they won the matchup. At 20, I have the best group of 5 team in the country in Air Force. At 19, I have Louisville falling 5 spots after a disappointing loss to Pittsburgh. I have Missouri up 7 spots all the way to 18. At 17, I have LSU jumping up 3 spots. At 16, I have Duke jumping in from being unranked last week, and they were unranked by mistake. I didn't mean to not have them unranked. I just kind of forgot that they existed, and then I went through the whole editing process without noticing. So I'll take the L on that one. Roast me if you want to. But I have Duke at 16, working back all the way to the top to Air Force. I think Air Force is the best group of 5 team. I think they're probably going to win the Mountain West, and I think they're probably going to end up being the team getting the New Year's Six bowl. At 19, Louisville, this was kind of a trap game coming off of a emotional victory over Notre Dame in which they absolutely dominated. This was a letdown game. It had letdown game written all over it, and it was a letdown game. They lost. That being said, it doesn't particularly change the fact that I still think they have a very favorable schedule, and it doesn't change the fact that they have a decent shot to go 11-1 or 10-2 to finish out the season in Jeff Brom's first year in Louisville. Missouri at 18 is a solid football team. I think they have a very good offense, an offense that is good enough to potentially pull off an upset against a better team than them. They just have to get through South Carolina this week. Then they have a bye week heading into an away game at Georgia. That is certainly one that should be circled, but they got to get through South Carolina this week, and South Carolina also has a pretty good offense, so can't look past them. At number 17, I have LSU, who are still kicking around when it comes to winning the SEC, or at least their half of the SEC. They play Alabama in a few weeks, and I think that game at this point of the season is pretty much going to decide who goes to the SEC championship game to lose to Georgia and probably get a New Year's Six bowl bid as the SEC runner-up. I got a Duke at 16. I think they're going to hit the wall these next few weeks. I really think that they're probably going to end the season like 8-4, maybe 9-3 if they can pull off an upset. I think they're a really good defense with a NFL quarterback, Riley Leonard, that is being held back by a lack of talent on the offensive side of the football surrounding Riley Leonard and a lack of offensive coaching. I do think Mike Elko is a very good head coach. I think he's probably going to end up at Michigan State, if I had to guess right now, after this season. But I could very well be wrong. He might stick around. He might go to a different job. Who knows? Either way, I do think he's a good coach. I do think he has built something at Notre Dame. I do think that they could be, should he decide to stay, a consistent-ish program. At number 15, I reluctantly have to put Ole Miss there. Really, all these next three teams, we'll talk about all of them in the same order. Ole Miss, Utah, and Tennessee all moved up 2 spots, and I don't think any of them are top 15 caliber teams. I think you can take maybe 11, maybe 12, the top 12 teams. I think you can draw a line, and then you can say these are the teams that have a legitimate chance to potentially make the playoff and everybody else doesn't. I don't think Ole Miss, Utah, or Tennessee are real contenders. I think Ole Miss doesn't have the defense, and their offense just schematically is not designed to be able to deal with teams that have the same level of talent defensively as they do offensively. What do I mean by that? I mean they look good against teams that they can out-athlete, and they don't look great against teams where they can't do that. Utah doesn't have a quarterback, and that has almost come to bite them in the ass a few times this year. They've managed to only come out of it with 1 loss, but I don't think they're a real contender in the Pac-12, and I think we're going to see that maybe as soon as this week. Tennessee at 13 is the one that I have perhaps the most confidence in. I know that that's kind of weird to say about Tennessee, but I do think Joe Milton is good enough at quarterback where if the defense plays at the high level that it has been playing at, that you could hypothetically maybe try to deal with Alabama this week, and then after that maybe against Georgia, but I don't see either of those games going Tennessee's way. Now, the next 2 teams are actual contenders within their conference and maybe dark horse teams to make the college football playoff. I think Alabama is a real legitimate contender. Oregon State I would quantify as a dark horse. Oregon State is really, really good. DJ Uiagalelei is playing phenomenal at the quarterback position. They're able to run the ball. They've got a stable of running backs that can compete with just about anybody in the country. The offensive line has been great, and Alabama has gotten better every single week. Milroe is slinging the rock now. The wide receiving core appears to have hit its stride. The offensive line is getting better. The run game is being utilized properly now, and the defense is still playing at a very high level. At number 10, I have Oregon. They're down 2 spots. At number 9, I have Texas. They're up 1. At 8, I have North Carolina. They're up 1. And Oklahoma and Penn State remain stagnant at 7 and 6. Oregon, it's a tough loss. If your kicker could have made that, who knows what happens in overtime. But you got to move on, you got to live with it, and you got to hope that you can run the table and play Washington again in the Pac-12 championship game. You're still very much in the thick of it. You're still a contender in the Pac-12. Hell, you might even be the favorite in the Pac-12 if you end up playing Washington again in the Rose Bowl at a neutral site. Texas at 9, you control your own destiny as far as I'm concerned. If you run the table, if you go 11-1, you're going to match up with Oklahoma again in all likelihood, and you can do the same thing that I just talked about with Oregon. On a neutral field, you might be favored, and you probably should win. At number 8, North Carolina, it's the same story. You control your own destiny. You win out, you're in the playoff. 13-0, 12-1. I still think you've got a really, really good chance to make the playoffs. Oklahoma, again, it's the same deal. You win out, you're good. If you lose one, you're probably out, though. I think you have less wiggle room than the 3 teams behind you, actually. I'm not sure a 12-1 Oklahoma team that drops a game that isn't to Texas in the Big 12 championship game is going to be able to make the playoffs. I think that 1 loss might keep you out, even if you beat Texas again in the Big 12 championship game. Penn State at number 6. They're really, really good, but we're going to find out about them this week. Come back on Wednesday for that video. We're going to be breaking down Penn State and Ohio State. I dropped FSU 3 spots, and it's not because I think FSU is bad. I think they're quite good. It's just that I can't justify having them above these other teams right now. I can't do it anymore. LSU is not the win that we thought it was going to be. Clemson is not the win that we thought it was going to be. Those 2 wins are okay wins, and you haven't played anybody else, and you also, outside of this past week really, haven't looked like a dominant force in those games either. You've kind of escaped a few games this year. At number 4, Ohio State. They're down 1 for me in this ranking. They did beat Notre Dame, which looks like a much better win now than it did last week. But Michigan, I think the reason I've swapped their position, Michigan, I think, has done enough these past few weeks, putting 50 points up each of the past few weeks, I think. They have done enough offensively to prove to me that they are for real on that side of the ball. And because of that, I think they're probably a better all-around team than Ohio State. And because they've looked so dominant and Ohio State hasn't, even against similar opponents, which is also a big deal. Michigan destroyed Indiana. Ohio State struggled. Now, I get that that's like an apples to orange comparison here because Ohio State played them week 1, Michigan played them week 7. But apples and oranges are both fruit. I think you can still glean information about each team through that game. They're going to have more common opponents in the upcoming few weeks, notably Penn State, but that'll sort itself out. At number 2, I have Washington. They had the best win in the country now. I've said that about a couple of other teams as well. I said Texas has the best win. They beat Alabama. No, Washington has the best win now that they've beaten Oregon. The best win can change throughout the season. It isn't just like a statement that you make once and then you're right. And Washington right now has the best win of anybody in the country. At number 1, we have Georgia. Georgia's number 1. They're probably the best team in the country. They're probably going to three-peat. Moving on to my power rankings. Before we even get into this, I want to stress that these power rankings are not based off of anything that these teams have done. So I'm not ranking wins. I'm not ranking losses. I am strictly going by how good I think these teams are. I'm also not particularly saying that the number 2 team would lose to the number 1 team because matchups are a thing. Like, for instance, I think Georgia would have to be more worried about Michigan than Penn State because Michigan has shown that their offensive line is capable of dominating in the run game. Penn State has been much more balanced and has been less dominant in the run game. So, now that I've said all that, I have Alabama at 10 and North Carolina at 9. Those two remained the same since this past week. I do think there is a tad bit of a gap between 10 and 9 and then the top 8. Like, I really think these top 8 teams can all win the national championship. And I think Alabama and North Carolina are probably a little bit more dark horse contenders than they are real national championship solidified guys that I absolutely believe can win the national championship. At number 8, I have Oregon, who is down 3 spots because I think it's really, really tight between all of these teams here. So they're down 3 spots after the loss to Washington. And more than that, the way they lost is really what has gotten me to move them down in this power ranking here, because they had that game in the bag and then they couldn't run the football at the end to secure it. And they gave the ball back to Michael Penix. And then after that, they couldn't march down the field like they had pretty much the whole game and win the game. Not necessarily just get in the field goal range, but actually go and win the game. So I've moved Oregon down a little bit. At 7, I have Texas. At 6, I have Oklahoma. They're pretty much tied. I think they're mirror images of each other. I think Oklahoma a little bit better at quarterback. Texas a little bit better at the skill positions. I think the offensive lines are almost exactly the same. I think the defenses are both borderline elite. I think they're mirror images of each other. At number 5, I have Florida State. They're up 1. At number 4, I have Michigan. They're down 1. At number 3, I have Washington, who's up 1. And Georgia and Penn State remain at 2 and 1. This order, to me, I think there might be a little bit of a gap between the top 4 and Florida State and then like 5 through 8. So I think you could maybe break that down into like 3 groups of 4 almost. But I decided not to do that because I literally just thought of it right now and I've already recorded the entire video. But when it comes down to it, I think Penn State is the best team in the country. I think they're going to beat both Ohio State and Michigan. I think the game this year is not going to matter in terms of like the national perspective. It'll matter to Ohio State and Michigan, but I don't particularly think it'll matter in the grand scheme of things because I don't think either an 11-1 Ohio State or an 11-1 Michigan stands a chance at making the college football playoff with how many good teams and how many still undefeated teams there are. Unfortunately, however, that is all that I have for you today. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point in the video, or if you just have something to say, be sure to go down into the comment section down below and leave a comment. Let's just remember to keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion, and I'll see you next time.